Secretary Kenny, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So before we jump into all these rules and regulations, I do want to take a moment to just make sure that everyone watching and that we here at the table have kind of a shared understanding of what we're talking about. So what are PFAS? What are these so-called forever chemicals?
Yeah, these are man-made chemicals that came about in the 1960s and have been used in many products that we, enjoy every day. But really what PFAS are chemicals that are really tough to break apart. They move through our bodies, they move through the environment, and they're hard to get rid of. They're hard to destroy.
That's the forever piece.
That's the forever piece, yeah. And it goes back to the chemistry of what these 19,000 chemicals look like. They're really hard to break the bonds. But they've been in everything from carpet cleaners and stain-resistant clothing to paints, cookware, all sorts of consumer products. So they're all around us and they're hard to get rid of. And then they have adverse health effects as well.
So what are the health risks for exposure to these things?
Yeah, we can talk about they can cause everything from at the worst end of the spectrum types of cancers. They're linked with everything from kidney cancer, liver cancer, colorectal cancer. They can cause reproductive issues in both men and women. They can also affect people like high cholesterol or preeclampsia, high pressure, blood pressure in pregnant women. So the range is huge.
And is that because we're ingesting them?
Yep, that's exactly it. So the most common route of exposure would be through drinking water or ingesting them that way, food or drinking water. But there's been studies done to look at whether there's a dermal contact or an inhalation contact.
Yeah.
If you get them on your skin or you inhale them through respiration.
Okay. And can you characterize kind of the extent of contamination of PFAS here in New Mexico? What's the scope of things locally here?
Yeah, it's significant. And, there's really two areas or two ways that we encounter PFAS in terms of consumer products being one, so things we bring into our home and interact with. The other would be is if you live around a federal facility like a base or maybe a national lab, that there's increased levels of PFAS in those environments based on the history of use and the lack of regulation at the same time. Okay. So those are kind of the two ways we see PFAS in the environment, in people, in plants, and in animals.
And when we're looking at the Air Force bases, this is really rooted in use of a particular kind of firefighting foam that's used on fires started by flammable liquids, like fuel fires, for instance. Yeah.
Yeah. So the firefighting foams, they're used to put out diesel or gasoline type fires. They're not used for wildfires. Mm-hmm. They're used for petrochemical or petroleum-based fires.
That you might find at an Air Force base.
Exactly. For emergency purposes, training purposes, or even spills, which we've seen at Cannon Air Force Base.
How do we know the extent of contamination across the state?
So, are you talking Air Force bases or just broadly across the state?
I suppose both, kind of the broader contamination landscape in the state, but you were talking specifically about the Air Force Base, so yeah. What do we know about what that spill has meant around Cannon, around Holloman Air Force bases?
Yeah, so around the military bases, back in 2015, 16, 17, they themselves were directed by Congress to look at the extent of contamination related to PFAS. Around that time, we started to see that Cannon and Holloman had significant levels of PFAS compared to other bases throughout the country. And that was reported to us by the Air Force. But when it comes to drinking water around the rest of the state or PFAS in the rest of the environment throughout New Mexico, we've been actively looking at drinking water, doing stream surveys, looking at landfills, and just trying to quantify what the risk exposure could be.
Okay. And your department has been tackling accountability around these spills in a number of different ways, and I want to take them kind of one at a time, starting with a new rule that the Environmental Improvement Board adopted just a couple weeks ago. It changes the way your department is able to regulate these firefighting foams that contain PFAS. So what does the rule do?
Yeah, so the rule is a big step forward in preventing future PFAS exposures. So one of the first things it does is it sets out a statewide inventory. So, we don't know where PFAS is in terms of fire suppression systems.
Like who's using these foams?
Yeah, exactly. Like small regional airports. Could it be used in, municipal and state government? We don't believe it is, but could it be? Sure, right? It's been around since the 60s. We don't know who's procured it. It could be used in other federal facilities, national labs, as I mentioned. So the rule first sets out a requirement to conduct a periodic inventory. Okay. Second, it prohibits the use of these firefighting foams for anything other than an emergency. Okay. So you can't train with them anymore. They can't be a neglected fire suppression system that's suddenly released and we had no idea about it.
What's the bar for an emergency?
Think of what it's designed to do. It's designed to put out fires that are diesel-based or gas-based. So an emergency would be in that category. Okay. A plane crash or something to that effect. And then third, and most importantly, it requires that you clean up in compliance with our hazardous waste requirements. So if you deploy it, even for emergency purposes, you still have to clean it up. You can't just deploy it and leave it in the ground.
You have tried to, force cleanup of these spills and accountability through fines, repeated fines of Cannon Air Force Base. You've sued the federal government over this matter. This new rule, how does it change the avenues that are available to you for accountability?
Yeah, and I always like to make the point that we have sued the military for their releases after they sued us. And I always think it's important to remind New Mexicans that our U.S. government has sued New Mexico and filed a lawsuit against us in 2019 saying that we don't have the authority to regulate PFAS as a hazardous waste. Well, guess what? We do. Our legislature and the Environmental Improvement Board have ruled in our favor and created these rules. So maybe back to your question, this new rule gives us the authority to not just go directly to federal court or state court. It gives us the administrative pathway to go file a complaint against somebody who releases PFAS and require them to clean it up in an administrative setting. It's a lower bar, or it's a lower court action, if you will, and it's where 90% of New Mexico Environment Department spends its time is in these administrative proceedings.
Do you think it will be more effective than your past efforts at requiring cleanup?
I don't know that it'll be more effective when it comes to the military. The federal government has been one of the most recalcitrant polluters in the state of New Mexico, and I think they will still be recalcitrant. But what the difference is that the Department of Justice said to New Mexico, the Federal Department of Justice said to New Mexico, you don't have the authority to regulate PFAS, so we're not going to clean it up. We now have that authority. So every time they make a legal argument, our legislature, the department, our governor has rallied around that argument and solved that problem. So there's really nowhere left to hide from a legal perspective. Okay. So we're hoping that now paints them into the corner, that they actually do the right thing.
Right. And in terms of the lawsuit, in addition to the federal government suing New Mexico, you all have sued the military. What's the status of that lawsuit?
Yeah, so that lawsuit where the state has sued the military was combined with a lot of lawsuits. It sits in South Carolina, what is called the Fourth Circuit. And we were at the front of the line for that, meaning the judge said, we're going to spend time working on the New Mexico case. And through a series of very kind of frustrating decisions, New Mexico got moved to the back of the line, and now they're working on essentially the liability of Dow and 3M and all the other chemical companies.
Okay, so it's going to be sitting there a while.
We've sat a while to begin with, and we're trying everything we can to get out of, either to reprioritize our case to the front of the line in front of like 400 other cases.
Can you move it?
Exactly. We want to move it out of South Carolina and back to New Mexico.
Okay. Is there any actions that your department has taken so far that is newly available to you?
Under the new rules.
Yeah.
Yeah. So those new rules will be published soon. I mean, yes, we have them available to us, and they have to be published next in the state bulletin. But the first thing we're going to do is get this inventory, get a sense of where PFAS is around the state.
Will your department be taking the inventory?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. We'll require it to be submitted to us. We'll look to see where the risk is. And then this is the genesis of maybe where we do like a buyback program. Like think of like a regional airport that maybe has PFAS but wants to get rid of it. They have other ways to suppress fires, or maybe they don't need as much as they have. So, you know, things that other states have done is do a buyback program where they safely bring it back and then send it out for destruction. So it gives us the authority to start making, or the ability to start making better decisions.
And will that start this year?
Yeah.
Okay.